Usually a normal conversation has a certain rhythm to it.
Right, yeah.
I like to think of it kind of like a gentle, low-stakes game of tennis. You hit the ball over the net with a really casual, like, hey, how was your weekend?
Exactly.
And the other person just hits it back with I'm pretty good. Just relaxed.
Yeah.
It's paced, right? It's polite. You both completely understand the rules of the court.
Yeah, there's this mutual agreement on the social contract. You're establishing a baseline of connection without demanding too much cognitive effort from either party.
But then you meet someone, maybe you're at a neighborhood barbecue or, I don't know, the break room at work, and suddenly that tennis match just completely evaporates.
It is entirely gone.
You ask how they're doing, and before you can even, take a sip of your coffee, they are downloading 15 years of deeply complicated, highly salacious family drama right into your cerebral cortex.
It's the absolute definition of conversational whiplash.
Yes. You don't even know their last name yet, but you suddenly know exactly why they haven't spoken to their Aunt Susan since the winter of 2018.
And you're just standing there completely paralyzed. You're drowning in this backstory that you never asked for and honestly have no idea what to do with.
Exactly. And so today, we are jumping straight into the deep end of this exact, incredibly common modern phenomenon in our deep dive.
It really is everywhere right now.
It is. And we're going to look at it through the lens of a single, highly popular piece of internet slang that has basically taken over everyday vernacular, which is the lor-drop.
The infamous lor-drop.
The infamous lor-drop. We're going to trace how an ancient Old English word for general knowledge somehow mutated over centuries into the ultimate Gen Z term for just oversharing juicy gossip on TikTok.
And, looking at this term isn't just about understanding some trendy phrase you might see in a video caption.
Right.
It actually serves as a really fascinating window into human behavior. We're examining what happens when we unleash just a sheer fire hose of information on people. Yeah.
And the psychology behind why we feel compelled to curate ourselves into characters and what it means when we force an audience to consume that curation.
Well, let's start at the very beginning because the journey of this word is just wild. Long before anybody had a smartphone, we actually have to travel back centuries to early Old English.
We do.
The word was originally spelled L-A-R, lar.
Yeah, lor. And in that early context, lor had absolutely nothing to do with a specific backstory or niche internet drama.
Right.
It simply meant knowledge or learning. In fact, the word lore is actually a distant relative of the verb learn itself. They share the exact same linguistic DNA.
That's so interesting. So let's visualize what knowledge meant back then. I kind of picture lore as this vast, unmapped globe of human understanding.
Okay, yeah.
It was everything a person could possibly know or learn just to survive. That's actually a really helpful way to think about it, because in an early agrarian society, the sum total of necessary human learning might just encompass a relatively manageable set of survival skills, seasonal patterns, cultural stories.
Right, stuff you need for the harvest.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A single village elder could feasibly hold a large percentage of that lore in their head.
Wow.
But as human societies evolve, language naturally has to compartmentalize.
Because the globe just gets way too crowded. I mean, you can't just be a master of all knowledge once society starts inventing complex legal systems and advanced maritime navigation.
Exactly. The sheer volume of information just expands way beyond the capacity of a single human mind.
Right.
We move from this agrarian existence into sprawling civilizations with specialized trades and sciences and detailed histories, so the language adapts to this new reality.
It has to.
Yeah, we stop using this root word to describe general learning, and we start categorizing information into specialized buckets. So suddenly you have botanical lore.
Oh, like which plants heal and which ones are poison.
Right. You have maritime lore, like how to navigate by specific constellations. You have local historical lore.
So, okay, let me unpack this. The word basically shrinks from being the entire globe to being like the street view of one very specific neighborhood.
Exactly.
That goes from everything there is to know down to just a specific body of facts about a particular subject.
It narrows significantly. It becomes a specialized domain.
Which brings us crashing right into the 2020s. Because once lore became about highly specific subjects, the internet grabbed hold of it. And suddenly, the subject became ourselves.
The shift to the personal mythos. This is really where the word finds its completely new lease on life in modern Gen Z parlance.
Yeah.
In the slang of the 2020s, lore is universally understood to mean a person's particular personal history.
And it comes with very specific ingredients, right? This is your childhood, your family background, the weird way you were raised, your chaotic past relationships.
All of it.
It's all the bizarre little ingredients that go into making you you. But, okay, here is where it gets really interesting, and I have to push back on this premise just a little bit.
Okay, go for it.
I am sort of struggling to see the fundamental difference between dropping your lore and just regular old gossiping or venting.
That's a valid point.
Right. I mean, we've had words for sharing messy personal histories forever. Why rebrand it as lore?
Well, I would argue they're fundamentally different mechanisms, and it speaks directly to the psychology of the modern internet user.
Okay, how so?
Well, gossip is inherently communal. It's usually what you're doing to someone else, often behind their back, to build social bonds with a third party.
Right, exactly.
Lore, on the other hand, is authoritarian. It is what you are doing to yourself in public.
Oh, wow. That is fascinating.
Yeah.
Authoritarian, you are dictating the canon.
You are. By adopting a word like lore, which, remember, was a word previously reserved for ancient myths, specialized academic fields, sprawling fantasy realms,
Yeah.
you are elevating the mundane reality of your own life to the status of a mythology. You aren't just complaining about an annoying ex-boyfriend anymore.
No, you are introducing a complex antagonist into your cinematic universe.
Exactly.
It's main character syndrome, but with footnotes.
Yes, perfectly said.
When someone calls their messy breakup lore, they're treating their own everyday lives with the reverence of a Marvel movie. You are essentially telling the listener, like, you cannot possibly understand my current character arc unless you understand the deep, intricate lore of my sophomore year of college.
Right. It frames the personal history not as just some casual anecdote, but as essential exposition. The whole TikTok era has completely transformed how we view our own narratives, essentially turning private, salacious backstory into public entertainment. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, let's look at how this plays out in a hypothetical, everyday scenario on your social media feed. You might be scrolling and see a video starting with someone putting on makeup, and the caption reads, "Get ready with me while I drop the lore of why I'm banned from my local Target."
Oh my gosh, I have seen that exact video 100 times.
Right. The creator is actively commodifying their own history. They are inviting you into a constructed universe where their bad decisions or family quirks are presented as highly structured, episodic content.
Which brings us to the actual delivery mechanism of all this content. We know what personal lore is now, this highly curated, self-mythologizing backstory. But the real problem is how it gets delivered to the unsuspecting public. And the terminology around this is just so evocative.
Mechanics of oversharing. We see terms like the lore drop, the lore stream, and the lore dump.
I love the sheer physical weight of those words. Drop, stream, dump. I mean, none of those words imply a gentle exchange.
No, not at all.
They sound like gravity's doing all the heavy lifting, and the listener's just standing underneath a falling piano.
They inherently imply a lack of control on the receiving end. And if we look at how dictionary definitions, like Merriam-Webster, are starting to frame these terms,
Yeah.
a lore drop usually carries a very specific negative implication. It strongly suggests that what is being shared, or the manner in which it's being revealed, is excessive, unnecessary, or just downright TMI.
Too much information. So let's break down the mechanics of why a lore drop feels so overwhelming in person. Is it inherently a bad thing, or is it purely a problem of volume?
It's largely the volume and the context.
Right, because imagine you ask someone that casual question at a party. Hey, how's it going? It's like taking your phone out to open a weather app.
Okay, I like this analogy.
You just want a quick 3-second piece of information, just a sip of water. But instead of the temperature, you get a pop-up warning that says, mandatory 50 gigabyte update required before proceeding.
Or someone turns a high-pressure fire hose on you, and your brain just completely freezes. You don't have the processing power or the storage space for a 50 gigabyte update at a party?
Exactly. The 50 gigabytes isn't necessarily bad data. The personal history might be genuinely interesting or, important, but the volume of it and the sudden paralyzing cognitive load placed on your brain when you were literally only expecting a weather update is what makes it a massive problem.
That cognitive load really is the core issue. The terminology in the dictionary, excessive, unnecessary, it points to a fundamental lack of social grace.
Right.
The issue isn't that the person has a complex childhood or some dramatic past. The issue is the non-consensual unloading of that complexity onto a listener who hasn't opted in.
Non-consensual unloading. It entirely bypasses that tennis match of human connection we talked about.
It does.
You can't hit the ball back when the other person has just dumped a dump truck full of tennis balls onto your side of the court.
It traps the listener. They are forced into the role of a passive consumer rather than an active participant in a conversation.
And you know that feeling of your brain freezing while a 50-gigabyte update downloads.
Yeah.
That doesn't just happen in neighborhood barbecues or on TikTok feeds. This concept of unloading unnecessary information transitions perfectly into the other major realm where we see lore dropping constantly.
Yeah.
We are moving from the personal fire hose of social media right into the fictional fire hose of literature.
Exactly, because lore dropping is certainly not exclusive to personal gossip. In the context of literature, storytelling, and gaming, a lore drop is defined as an overly detailed, dry, verbose passage of exposition.
Ugh, the dreaded exposition dump. We have all been victimized by this as readers.
We really have. It occurs when a text sets out far more knowledge or intricate backstory than the reader actually needs to understand the story.
Yeah.
It is incredibly common in fantasy literature, sci-fi, and online world-building spaces.
This happens when an author falls completely hopelessly in love with their own creation.
Yeah.
I mean, they've spent 6 months drawing maps, figuring out magical systems, charting the lineage of ancient kings, defining the geography of a made-up realm.
They've done all the work.
Right. They put all that hard work in, and they desperately want the reader to validate it. So they drop the lore.
They lack what we call the ruthless editor.
Yes,
Yeah.
the ruthless editor. Let's talk about what happens when that editor is just completely missing. So what does this all actually mean for the reader? Imagine you are reading a massive epic fantasy novel.
Okay.
You are deeply invested in the hero. They are standing on the walls of the castle, sword drawn, and you are waiting for the dragon to attack.
The stakes are sky high.
Your heart is pounding. But instead of the dragon swooping down, the author pauses the action for 3 solid pages to describe the intricate, highly specific tax code of a fictional goblin kingdom located 100 miles away.
And in the author's mind, they believe they are enriching the world, providing depth and texture to the reading experience.
But really, they are just showing off their goblin tax code. You do not need to understand imaginary marginal tax rates to know that a fire-breathing dragon is dangerous.
Yeah.
It completely stalls the momentum of the plot.
It really does. The mechanics of the literary lore drop are absolutely identical to the conversational lore drop at a party.
Getting cornered at a party is the exact same experience as reading a poorly edited fantasy novel.
Exactly. The author and the oversharer are both committing the exact same error. They are prioritizing their desire to broadcast information over the audience's capacity to absorb it. Both are desperately in need of an editor.
Which brings us back to that concept. What is the actual function of an editor in that scenario?
Well, this raises an important question, right? An editor's primary function is to serve the narrative momentum.
Okay.
They look at the minutia, whether it's the goblin tax code or the highly specific details of a messy real-life breakup. And they ask one simple, vital question.
Which is?
Does the audience actually need this for the plot to move forward?
And 99% of the time, the answer is a resounding no.
Usually, yeah.
Yeah.
It requires an intense amount of critical thinking and self-awareness to balance the desire to share this intricate world you've built with what the audience can actually digest. It is the crucial difference between effective world building and thoughtless world dumping.
Right. So synthesizing everything we've explored today, whether it is a juicy, salacious personal history dropped on a TikTok timeline or a dense, dry, literary backstory in a 900-page fantasy novel.
Yeah.
A lore drop is ultimately about the pure act of revealing information. And the most critical realization from everything we've discussed is that this act happens regardless of whether the audience actually wants to hear it or not.
It all comes down to audience awareness. We've traced this word from its origins as the vast globe of all human learning, watched it narrow down to specific specialized disciplines, and finally observed its transformation into a colloquial term for overwhelming someone with your personal backstory.
It's been quite a journey.
It has. And across all these eras, the common thread is the sheer weight of the information being exchanged.
So for everyone listening, I want you to think about your own personal lore for a second. We all have it. You have those stories you tell on a first date, the childhood memories that explain your weird phobias, the relationship drama that shaped who you are today.
Right.
It is your own personal mythology. But the next time you are sitting across from a friend at a coffee shop or drafting a massive post on social media, be mindful of your mechanics. Ask yourself, are you dropping it, streaming it, or dumping it? Are you passing the tennis ball? Or are you initiating a 50-gigabyte mandatory update on someone who just asked you how your weekend was?
Cultivating that internal ruthless editor is becoming an essential modern social skill. Because if we are increasingly treating our own lives as lore to be dropped and consumed by online audiences,
Yeah.
if we're all acting as the authors of our own personal fantasy novels, it leads to a rather provocative final thought.
Oh. Where does the logic of self-mythologizing ultimately take us?
Well, if we view our own lives purely as content to be packaged and consumed by an audience, how long until we start acting as our own ruthless editors in real time?
Wait, what do you mean?
I don't just mean withholding the boring parts of our day. I mean actively, retroactively tweaking and editing our own actual memories.
Oh, wow.
Trimming the inconvenient facts, smoothing out the contradictions, and essentially fictionalizing our own past just to make sure our personal world building is a more streamlined, entertaining read for our followers.
That is deeply unsettling. Instead of just dropping the lore, we start rewriting the canon of our own lives because the truth isn't engaging enough. We become unreliable narrators of our own history, purposefully blurring reality just to keep the audience hooked.
Exactly.
Well, on that note, keep your lore honest and keep your fire hoses in check. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.